Hello again, and welcome back to the most accurate podcast here at 4 for 4. I am Matt Okada once again, joined by John Paulson once again. It has been a whole 2 days since I've seen you, John. Are you any better or worse than you were then?
About the same. It's
Yeah.
Wednesday today, which is good. I guess I've been a little bit better moving through the week.
Yes, Wednesday is a great day. We're that much closer to the weekend. And we are also excited and happy to be joined today by Marcus Grant of many places, primarily the NFL Network and NFL Fantasy, which is where I know him from. Marcus, welcome in. How are you doing?
Doing good. Glad to be here. Summer vacation is over for all of us. Training camps are open, so might as well not fight it and let's just get into it. Let's enjoy football when it's here.
Yeah, people are on football fields, whether they're wearing shorts and making highlight reel catches, and we don't know what the coach is saying is true or false or what. But do give us a little summary, Marcus, of what you do, both for the NFL and elsewhere, because I know you got your toes in a lot of waters these days.
Yeah, no. So like you mentioned, the main gig is with the NFL. NFL Fantasy Live will actually be back starting on August 12th. So we're just a couple weeks away from us being back on your TV screens on NFL Network. I do the NFL Fantasy Football Podcast with Michael F. Florio, Laquan Jones. You can find that a couple times a week in everywhere you download podcasts. Then I've been fortunate to do some stuff with Matthew Berry's Fantasy Life group. Actually, I'm doing a show on Sirius XM Radio on Saturday mornings. For those of you on the West Coast, if you want to wake up at 6 a.m., it's a little bit nicer for the East Coast folks. It's from 9 a.m., 9 to 11 Eastern time. But I do that. And also I've been doing some part-time radio stuff over at ESPN 710 in Los Angeles. You can hear me whine about the Dodgers most weekday mornings on a live YouTube stream. So that's been fun.
Absolutely. If you're interested in the other round ball shaped sports,
exactly.
Check that out. All right. Well, we have a great show today. We're going to get into a bunch of interesting ADPs later in the show, break down whether we like the guys where they're at, then play a little ADP name game at the end as well. But before we get there, Marcus, we have been hitting on the Scott Fishbowl the last few episodes. We both drafted half of our rosters this past Saturday live, but you are all done.
Yep.
Full roster acquired. So let us know what was your strategy if you had one, favorite picks, interesting picks. How'd it go for you?
I'm actually really happy with this team, which gives me pause about what the season is going to be. But I like what I put together so far. I wanted to make sure I got a quarterback early, probably preferably in the first round, but certainly in the first two rounds. So I took C.J. Stroud at the number 8 overall pick. Hadn't really planned on getting a quarterback back-to-back, but it sort of fell to me that Kyler Murray was still there, and that's a guy that I really do like this year. I know, Matt, you are a big Kyler Murray fan. So I took him with my second-round pick, then wanted to get on the tight end premium, so I went Kyle Pitts because some people are back in on Kyle Pitts. I never left. So I'm like, I'll get him there because tight ends were starting to go, and I didn't really want to miss out on some of the top-tier tight ends, so I made sure I got Kyle Pitts. At that point, sort of just alternated between wide receivers, running backs. I like the running backs I got sort of in the mid-rounds. David Montgomery, Jalen Warren. I'm not a huge Aaron Jones fan, but when he lasts till the 9th round, it felt hard to sort of pass up on that. And it took the shot on Will Levis as a third quarterback. I'm starting to kind of buy in there. And then just kind of later, I like the upside guys I got late. Ray Davis in the 16th round, Malachi Corley, Jalen McMillan, Theo Johnson as a third tight end option just in case the Giants sort of figure something else out. So, like I said, I like the way it sort of fell to me. I'm really happy with how this works. I say that now, and then I'll probably look at it that first week in September and be like, what the hell was I thinking? But for now, I'm pretty pleased with it.
As a diehard fan and lover of Kyler Murray and Kyle Pitts this year, I love that start. And I will say, I do love Aaron Jones. I don't know whether I should or not, but I do this year, so I'm in on that as well. It's worth noting for John and I won't go through the whole rosters because we did that on Monday, but we have gotten a few more rounds in the book, and John, I glanced. It looks like both of us are hitting the returners pretty hard. We both got Braxton Berrios. I got Kevontae Turpin. You got Xavier Gibson and Darius Davis, and we both got a kicker. So we are going hard into the Scott Fishbowl weird scoring settings here. How you feeling about what you've gotten since Monday?
I'm a little worried. Everybody else is sort of ignoring it. We have one other guy in my draft that's drafting returners. I see that Marcus just isn't really buying into the returner thing, so I'm starting to get a little concerned. But we've got a
No,
lot.
I like that you guys did that. Like, I know a lot of people are. I haven't leaned into it, but I think that's just my own particular fear, not any sort of strategic thing.
Yeah, we definitely have some variance with this new kickoff rule in terms of trying to project return yards. I do think that the return yards will be kickoff return yards. There'll be more returns and more yards, and probably more yards per return. But we'll see. Yeah, Gibson, one of the best returners last year. Barrios, one of the best returners last year. Davis did well as well. I went with Tyrod Tracy because he's making, he's apparently in the ear of the special teams coach there with the Giants, trying to get on the return team and has some return experience. Plus, he looks like he might be the backup to a fairly vulnerable Devin Singletary. I would say, he's, well, I don't know, he's not rock solid in terms of having that lockdown on that RB1 role. So I think he could see some third down work, Tracy, and then also be a returner, so he could be valuable for me. The Justin Tucker pick was just sort of, I'm going to lock up my kicker, and then the John Smith pick in the 16th round is actually an accident. I was trying to add him to my queue, and all of a sudden I was on the clock. So as I pressed the button, he picked him. I'm like, all right, well, I like John Smith in Miami as my third tight end. But I did notice that Marcus and I had kind of the same start with the two quarterbacks and then a tight end in the third round there. I think we kind of, I came in thinking I wanted my two quarterbacks and then try to get a stud tight end and then worry about the rest of the roster. I figured at receiver I could get quite a few returners and have that. You don't have to start that many, like one receiver, one running back. Yeah. So it's not like there's a lot of restraint on how you can kind of roll out your flexes.
Yeah. One at each of the major positions and then a million flexes. So there's so much flexibility for builds. We'll see a ton of random stuff, I'm sure, across the Scott Fishbowl. All right. Well, good luck to each of us. I feel like, John, that we're either going to be absolutely horrible because this return thing doesn't work out, or they're all going to be wide receiver ones and we're going to be in the playoffs. Easily.
Yeah, I think it's good. Look, when I look at the game logs for these returners, I'm getting a little scared because it's like might have 40 points one week and then 2 the next because they don't get any returns. So we'll see how it shakes out as the season wears on.
All right. Well, we'll keep you guys posted on that and once things actually get into gear. But for now, we are going to break down some ADP inquiries, some guys with interesting, curious, unique-looking ADPs based off of who they are, who they've been, maybe where they're drafted on one side compared to another, where they're being drafted compared to rankings. For some reason, these ADPs stand out a little bit, and we're going to dive into whether we like the players at these spots, whether we like other guys in that range better. And for mechanical purposes, we're using aggregate ADP from 444. It combines Underdog, CBS, ESPN, all the major sites because, it's average draft position. That's kind of the point. Half PPR. So let's start it off with the highest ever drafted, as of right now, rookie wide receiver, which is why he's in here. Obviously, we don't have the most complete of ADP data back in the old days when we used newspapers and stuff. But as far as we know, this is the highest a rookie wide receiver is ever going in fantasy drafts. Marvin Harrison Jr., 15th overall, the 203, the wide receiver 9. He's going ahead of guys like Devontae Adams, Drake London, Chris Olave. And the ADP is weird, but it is worth noting a rookie wide receiver has finished in the top 6 in fantasy in 3 of the last 4 years. We had Puka, we had Jamar Chase, we had Justin Jefferson. Garrett Wilson was the best in 2022. Obviously, if he had a better quarterback, maybe that would have been a top 6 finish as well. So it almost doesn't seem as crazy as it maybe should. We just have to know if this is the guy or not. Marcus, I'll kick it to you first. Is this the guy to justify that kind of ADP?
I think he is. I think Marvin Harrison is that dream combination of talent and opportunity. He was, you can debate, you can split hairs on whether or not you liked Harrison or Malik Neighbors or whomever you liked as the number 1 wide receiver. The bottom line is this is a guy that everybody agrees is immensely talented. He goes to a situation in Arizona where there is no true number one wide receiver. So just on talent alone, he sort of slots into that. And as you talked about with guys like Garrett Wilson, I think with Drake London in his rookie year, he has a quarterback that can deliver him the football where those other guys really didn't. So you've got a guy who's going to be a target monster. You've got a quarterback in Kyler that can get him the ball. You got an offense that I think is going to have to throw the football and score points. I think the Cardinals will be better than they have been in past years, but you're still in a division with the 49ers and with the Rams. You're going to have to move the football. You're going to have to score some points. So I do think this is one of those situations where Marvin Harrison can sort of pay off that ADP. I think he finishes certainly in the top 10. And, if things break right and maybe he has that phenomenal rookie year, maybe we are talking about a top 8 finish.
Yeah, John, I feel like some of this is about the upside. We certainly know how talented he is as a prospect, but I think a lot of it is about the lack of downside. There seems to be very little, if any, risk or downside to this pick, which is so unique for a rookie. Do you see anywhere? Do you have any concerns?
Maybe he struggles a little bit coming in, but just those days of waiting on your receiver to have a breakout season, third year, we were talking about it on Monday, those days are over. These receivers are ready to play in the NFL, especially the top ones. And I've got him at wide receiver 8, just ahead of Puka Nacua. And I mean, Marcus touched on it. It's just basically talent plus opportunity plus a quarterback. I mean, this is the perfect landing spot for him. The Cardinals probably won't be a great team either, and will have to throw the ball quite a bit. So this is like the perfect storm of production for a rookie receiver.
Yeah, I think the big thing here is this kind of opportunity in this kind of likely offense with this quarterback. If we knew the talent from an NFL perspective, if we'd seen for a couple years, he'd be a top 3 wide receiver, most likely. The only reason he's not higher is because he's a rookie. But you talk to any draft scout, anyone who evaluates prospects, and this is very nearly a generation of wide receiver talent. So you throw that in as well, and it makes sense to me. I think it makes sense to all of us.
Yeah, I mean, his dad was pretty good.
Yeah, I heard that.
Not bad. I hear he's in a hall of some kind. All right. Well, we like the first ADP. Let's go on to another one, see if we can keep this trend going. Kyren Williams going 16th overall, 204. So very shortly after Marvin Harrison. He is the RB7 behind Jonathan Taylor, Jahmyr Gibbs, Saquon Barkley. Worth noting, he's going a whole round later on Underdog compared to the total aggregate of 204. He's going 305 on Underdog. So that's an interesting tidbit. But I'm also curious, he was the RB2 in points per game last year. So when he played, he missed a few games, but when he played, he was as good as it gets besides Christian McCaffrey. He was the RB6 overall, counting those missed games, which is still ahead of where he's going. Obviously, the Rams did get another running back in Blake Corum, drafted in the 3rd round, who certainly had a lot of production in college. John, I'll throw it to you first this time. It feels like, to me, a little bit, this is why he's in here, he's either going to be much better than this, or Blake Corum's going to steal a bunch of work and he's going to be much worse than this. Is this just a hedge between the two, or do you like him where it is?
Yeah, I think he's kind of falling in the average between people that like him and people that are scared of him with that Corum pick. I'm in on him. I have him in Scott Fishbowl. I think he's a good value at RB7. I have him at RB4. Just the touches were definitely there last year. He was RB2 on a per game basis while handling 21.7 of the team's 28 backfield touches in his 12 games played. Even if his touches fall to the 18-19 range, or 64 to 68% of the team's backfield touches, which is giving up a significant amount of work, 3 or 4 touches, plus, Corum getting whatever the backups were getting there last year. He's still looking at 16.5, 17.5 half PPR fantasy points per game. That still would have made him the number 2 running back behind Christian McCaffrey. So I think I don't think he's ahead of Hall or Bijan, but I think he's right there in the next tier. And he's got one of the biggest floors in terms of workload. Looking at some of these other guys, we know he's going to catch some passes. Saquon Barkley, we're not as sure about. Derrick Henry, he's going to get a ton of carries, but not many catches. Devon Achane is going to probably see 14 or 15 touches, not as many as Kyren. So I just think he's a really high touch floor in the second group of running backs.
Marcus, where on the green to red fire danger scale is your concern over Blake Corum taking any significant work from Kyren Williams?
I guess it's yellowish, maybe orange, a little
Okay.
bit. I am on the other side from John, where I am part of that group that's a little bit concerned about Blake Corum taking some opportunity. I mean, if you believe in draft capital, the Rams do have more draft capital invested in Corum than they do in Kyren Williams. There's also the fact that it just has felt for years to me that given his druthers, which is a very old-timey word, that Sean McVay would rather not use one running back, sort of like he did with Todd Gurley. I think he would prefer to use multiple backs. I think last year they just got in a situation where they couldn't deny Kyren. Also, that on-again, off-again thing with him and Cam Akers just, sort of kind of, I think, ran its course, and you saw Akers get shipped out. But I think Corum is a guy who can step in and take some of those opportunities away from Williams. So I like him a lot better. You mentioned that underdog ADP being about a round later. I think I'd feel a little bit safer with Williams in that third round versus the second, because I'm just not convinced that we're going to see him get the same number of touches per game that we saw last year.
It is pretty interesting when you're evaluating coaching and coach history, looking at, okay, well, are they going to stick to what they've always done, or are they going to learn from I don't know if I'd call it a mistake, but to your point, Todd Gurley had among the most touches in the league for several years running, and then had a very shortened career, possibly somewhat as a result, obviously a lot of injuries as well. It's usually rare that coaches change majorly what they do in the NFL, from what I've seen. But Sean McVay is, probably a little bit more nimble than others. So perhaps he'll give a little bit more lightened workload to Kyren. I think the main question is, does it fall down to that 18-19 range John talked about, where he's still likely to return value here? Or does it maybe fall a little lower than that? So I haven't found myself getting much Kyren Williams, I think, because I'm wavering between those two sides that we keep talking about. And the middle area where he's going just doesn't feel exactly right to me. So I haven't done it, but I don't hate it at all. It's an interesting conversation with two sides that make sense. All right, let's move on to another wide receiver. We mentioned him a little bit earlier, Drake London, going 19th overall, 207. He's the wide receiver 11 between Devontae Adams and Chris Olave. Now, the reason he's here, or the reason he's here in this podcast, is because that is awfully high compared to what we've seen from him through two seasons. Very consistent in his first two seasons, but the numbers are right around 70 catches, 900 yards, and 3 touchdowns. That's not wide receiver 11 by a long shot. Obviously, he has a new quarterback, and I think that a lot of people, myself included, hint, hint, believe in that quarterback's ability to support Drake London, that being Kirk Cousins, of course. But is this too high? Has this gotten out of hand for a guy who's finished outside wide receiver 2 range through the first couple of years of his career? Marcus, I'll throw it to you. How confident are you? I know you like Kyle Pitts, in Drake London getting that same bump.
I mean, it might be a little crazy, but call me crazy, because I'm in on it, right? And I think you mentioned faith in the quarterback. It's also faith in the doctors who performed the surgery on Kirk Cousins' Achilles tendon, right? That he's going to stay healthy and be productive and look like the same Kirk Cousins we saw for those years in Minnesota. But I'm willing to believe, because for Drake London, for Kyle Pitts, it's the same. It's the improvement in quarterback play. And it's no longer having a galaxy-brained offensive coach, right? You're not going to have, in theory, you're not going to have an offense where you've got your third string tight end throwing passes in the red zone to your second string tight end, right? Like, hopefully that's gone at this point. So I think we probably are a little bit over our skis on this thing, but I'm willing to kind of take that shot and believe that now, with the circumstances being what they are, Drake London can sort of achieve that belief that we've had, that expectation that he can be a wide receiver 1. So yeah, maybe it's a little rich, but I think I'm willing to put a chip on that and believe that it comes true.
John, you do have a little lower than this in your rankings. Your projections for him are all higher than those numbers he's hit, but not quite enough to get him this high in your rankings. Do you feel like this is way too rich? Are you willing to draft him at all close to this range?
I was reading my player blurb on him, and I was kind of chuckling to myself and then Marcus said we're out over our skis a little bit, and maybe we are. a bit. He's only 6 points off of the projection for Brandon Ayuk, who's my wide receiver 11 right now. So it's not like this is a pretty bunched up group of receivers.
Okay.
If I were to adjust anything, it might bump him up several spots. But with that said, he was the wide receiver 40 last season. He had really suspect, and I think that's probably putting it nicely, quarterback play, some suspect play calling usage from Arthur Smith throughout his career. With Cousins coming out the torn Achilles, that's the key. Like if he's back to himself, then I'll feel better. There is some risk there if he were to miss time or just not be himself. And it's also his plant foot, as we were discussing on Monday. But he offered 19.1 more fantasy points per pass attempt to his receivers than the Atlanta quarterbacks did last year. The Rams, and I'm bringing up the Rams because Zach Robinson is the OC in name for the Rams, but they attempted 10% more passes last season than the Falcons did. So when you combine those two, he could be looking at a 31% increase in fantasy points, Drake London, and the same would go for Kyle Pitts for those that are interested in Kyle Pitts. But if you apply that to his production last year, that only puts him at wide receiver 21. So I'm a little bit worried that wide receiver 11 is just a bit too rich for a guy who's likely to have a breakout, but I don't know if the breakout's going to justify the draft position.
Yeah, I will say this ADP is very upsetting to me because I was drafting and wanted to draft Drake London absolutely everywhere. I loved him as a prospect. I love this improvement for him. You hit on the quarterback play. It is pretty much as bad as it can get over his first couple of years. And I will take Kirk Cousins on 1 foot over those guys by a good amount. So this is going to be a breakout for him, an improvement for him as long as he's healthy. Like you said, just a question of how much. But this price makes it a lot harder. I'm still probably taking him here, but I would rather him drop down a little bit. Maybe we get some questionable Kirk Cousins Achilles news and we bump this down. That'll be really nice.
I would just say looking at the ADP, you can talk yourself out of the guys going below him. Like they're not the wide receiver 1 necessarily on their team, other than maybe Mike Evans. I mean, Nico Collins, Brandon Ayuk, Deebo Samuel obviously have their competition going on in San Francisco. Jalen Waddle, Michael Pittman, Cooper Kupp. So Pittman, the wide receiver 1, but the Colts have their own pass challenges probably this year. So Drake London is the wide receiver 1 and what's probably going to be a pass happy offense from a good quarterback. So I could see the argument that he should be up there in the top 12.
All right, let's hop onto our first tight end, Sam LaPorta. He is the first tight end in every way right now, going at a 211, 23rd overall. Very, very high. Obviously, justifiably so based off what we all saw from him last year. As good a season as we've ever seen from a rookie tight end. Absolutely unbelievable. We can expect that to stay the same or improve as he continues to adjust to the NFL game. But this is going ahead of Devon Achane, ahead of Travis Kelce, ahead of Mike Evans, ahead of every quarterback in the draft, ahead of obviously every other tight end in the draft. Is that too rich for a guy we've seen one season from in Sam LaPorta? John, I'll throw it to you first. Are you concerned about how high this ADP is getting?
Not really. I mean, you look at what LaPorta did as a rookie. You expect some growth in year 2. The environment's completely the same. Like there's no big changes there. So you're expecting basically a repeat of last year plus some growth. And I think I'm a huge proponent of stud tight ends. So, drafting him ahead of some of these, fringe wide receiver 1s or high end wide receiver 2s, I have no problem with that. I love having a weapon like this in my tight end spot because everybody else is sort of scrambling, running whoever they can out there half the field anyway. So yeah, I don't have a problem with it at all. I have him as my tight end 1. Kelce has taken a step back efficiency wise. You could maybe make an argument that like a Mark Andrews could finish tight end 1 overall, but I don't see anybody else threatening. So yeah, I think LaPorta is the guy.
Marcus, you expect him to stay the same, be better?
I think statistically, I think he's going to stay about the same. And I'll say this. I think the ADP is fine where it is because remember this time last year, we were so hyped on Travis Kelce. We were talking about him in the first round, right? So the fact that now we're taking the first tight end at the end of the second round. There does seem to be a little bit more sanity, I think, a little bit more sobriety in this. And so I think that part is sort of good. But I will say that even then, I haven't drafted a lot of Sam LaPorta just because I think now the gap between the number one tight end and everybody else is closing a little bit. I mean, part of why Kelsey was going where he was is because he was the biggest single player advantage you could have in fantasy a couple years ago. That doesn't really exist anymore. And so instead of taking LaPorta at the end of the third round, I have been a lot more comfortable waiting a round or two and getting a Trey McBride, a Mark Andrews, something like that. But I do think the ADP, I think, is fine for where it is, for what his production is, what the expectations of his production are. I just have preferred to wait because I think I can get similar production at a little bit of a nicer cost.
Yeah, that's my exact feeling on the matter, and I think that's why I don't feel. I think it's somewhat fair to say this is an okay ADP, but I think to your point, like, I like the guys, the Andrews and McBrides, a little bit later than this, pretty much as much, and that makes this price a little harder to swallow. But if you like LaPorta more than those guys, then I don't think it's problematic. I don't think it's unfair. You can take him at 211 and feel pretty good. I think I'm in the same boat as you. I have ended up and probably will continue to end up taking one of those other guys a little bit later, or just Kyle Pitts. Let's be honest. I'm probably going to take him every league I'm in, but that's how it works. All right, let's go to a gap comparison. We've talked about these guys a couple times on the pods these past couple weeks because we've been talking about what's going to happen in training camp, what's going to happen in these murky depth chart situations. This one's hard to call murky because both these guys are so good, but Devon Achane and Raheem Mostert in the Dolphins backfield are going at the 212 for Achane, which is RB11, and the 707 for Raheem Mostert, which is RB25. Now, Raheem Mostert is a year older. To be fair, Achane is also a year older, but the years matter more when you're 32, which is what Mostert is. But just looking at last year, Mostert averaged 17 fantasy points a game. He finished as the RB3 in that metric. Obviously, a lot of that was touchdowns. You can project that some of those touchdowns will drop. But Devon Achane, if you take out a couple games where he played single-digit snaps, averaged 19.4 fantasy points per game. That would have been also the RB3, would have supplanted Mostert, also heavily on the back of touchdowns. Both of these guys were incredible. This ADP gap says to me that Mostert's about to fall off and Achane's taking the true number one role. Marcus, I'll throw it to you first. Do you believe that, or do you see that there is a value problem here between these two?
Yeah, I do not believe that. I don't believe that because the Dolphins were quick to sign Mostert to an extension in the offseason. And that, to me, said that they still believe that he's got a role in this offense. I do like, look, I think Achane's ADP has come down from where it was early in draft season. I don't know if that's people saw what the gap was originally, because I felt like it was, Achane late first, early second round, and then Mostert in like the 9th round. So the gap has closed somewhat. So maybe people have started to kind of wonder, like, what are we doing here? But I still think both these guys are going to end up, when it's all said and done, fairly close to each other in terms of their overall production. Mostert's touchdown number comes down, right? He's not going to have 21 total touchdowns this year like he did last year. But at the same time, I don't expect Devon Achane to average nearly 8 yards per carry the way he did last year either. So unless he gets a huge boost in the number of overall touches, which I don't foresee, he almost has to keep that insane level of efficiency to have the same level of production. So I'm just not seeing it. I have been very content to pass on Achane and take Mostert, but I am sort of pleased to see that the gap seems to be getting smaller.
John, are you taking both of these guys at this value? Either of these guys at this value? Neither? Where do you fall on these two?
I think ADP is fine for both players, and I understand why they're where they're at. I think it's ageism. Let's be honest.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And Mostert's history of injury, he already has a pretty checkered injury history. So I think the way this is most likely going to play out is that they start the season. They're basically splitting the way they did at the end of last season. And at the end of last season, Mostert saw 15.8 touches in the last 4 games with Achane. Achane saw, I believe, 13.9 touches in those games, games on the stretch. So it's basically 16 to 14, and it might end up being 15-15, just a 50-50 split. I do think they probably want to get Achane more involved after how productive he was last year. Plus, he's a rookie moving into his second season. So they're going to look at this, I think, as a 1-2 punch. Let's keep Mostert healthy and lean on Achane as a very healthy backup. And basically, I think they're going to rotate series, and then whoever's hot in the second half probably gets a bit more work. So ultimately, Mostert to me looks like an ideal type, like 0 RB pick, because he'll be healthy for that first month or 2 of the season, probably. And he can get you, bridge you to that week 8 or week 7, and you start picking up some of these backup running backs as you try to play the running back roulette. Achane, I think, if he ends up in a 16, 17 touch role, has RB1 overall upside. So I do think end of second round is an exciting time to take him. And he certainly is like, there was a period where everybody was excited about taking Kyle Pitts. And I was like, oh, this is fun. This is fun taking Achane, because he's like, high risk, high reward, but super, super productive. And we saw his efficiency numbers were just out of this world. So even if they do regress, I don't think he has to keep it up in order to be, still be super productive with his touches.
Yeah, just to put some hard numbers to some of what both of you guys said, I wrote the running back touchdowns over expectation article earlier this year for 4for4. Mostert and Achane were at the very top of the list in the above expectation touchdowns scored last year, and in a way that's just absurd. Mostert scored 8 more touchdowns than he should have. Achane scored 6 more touchdowns than he should have. Mostert scored a touchdown on 8.7% of his touches. Achane on 7.9%. Both of those numbers are absolutely insane, and I did a 10-year sample to gather this data. No one ever has posted 6% or better in back-to-back years in that whole sample. So the touchdowns are almost certainly, barring some McDaniel witchcraft, coming down from the numbers we saw last year, and that means both of these guys are going to drop. But, that was RB2 or RB3 type points per game numbers for those guys. So getting them where they're going now isn't necessarily a problem. I do agree that they're going to be closer than this, and for that reason, I would prefer to get Mostert here, but I don't think it's a problem getting Achane where he is. I would just rather have the guy who I think is going to be close in value at a much, much reduced price. So give me Mostert. Yeah, go ahead, Mark.
I'm also going to go out on a limb, Matt, and say that they're not going to have a game where they score 70 points this year. and those two guys combined for 9 touchdowns the way they did last year.
Yeah.
I would say, just to add piggyback what you're saying there, Matt, is that they will be close in total production if they both stay healthy. And I think that we probably are projecting Mostert's injury games to, miss more games than Achane, but Achane wasn't fully healthy last year either. So it's not like he's the picture of durability.
No. And I think that to our Rams discussion earlier, this is a backfield where they definitely are going to mix to try to keep both guys healthy. McDaniels has shown that. So we'll see whether both can return value on these numbers. Let's hop to another group we've hit on a couple times, the Houston wide receivers. It's tough to figure out which one, as we've talked about a couple times, but just looking at their ADPs, let's translate whether we're okay taking each one where they're going. So Nico Collins is going at the 304. He's wide receiver 14. Stephon Diggs is going at the 408. He's wide receiver 23. And then Tank Dell is going at the 506. He's wide receiver 27. John, I'll hit you on this first. We've talked about your ranking on Nico Collins, so I feel pretty confident how you feel about him. But are you willing to take any of these guys at those prices?
Well, I really like Nico Collins, but the fact of the matter is when he and Dell played together in healthy games, Dell outscored him by about 2 fantasy points. So those two should be a lot closer unless you think that Collins is going to stay healthier than Dell, or that Diggs' arrival is going to impact Dell more than it impacts Collins. So Collins to me is too high. Diggs is also a little too high. I have Dell ahead of Diggs as the number 2 receiver, and I wouldn't be shocked if Dell played a full season, if he led the team in receiving. CJ Stroud loves him. So I think at these ADPs, I'm a buy on Dell, and I'm just not targeting Collins that early. I would be happy to have him at wide receiver 18 or 20 or something like that. And then I think Diggs is a little bit high because I just don't know how he fits in into this offense with the built-in rapport that Nico Collins and Tank Dell have with CJ Stroud.
Marcus, do you like the ADP order, and how do you feel about the gap between the guys?
I like the order. I think the gap is fine, but I'm sort of with John on this, that I don't really find myself drafting any of them because there is so much uncertainty there. Now, I have told myself a story where Stephon Diggs goes on this like Thanos-like run through the NFL just to prove to everyone, mostly the Bills, that he can still do it, that he can still be that guy at a level. That's not quantifiable. Like there's no metrics or stats that tell me this is going to happen. This is just sort of, reading the tea leaves on a guy who really does seem to constantly have that chip on his shoulder and is out to prove something. But really just because it's so cloudy, I've stayed away from it. I think the other thing to keep in mind is they did bring in Joe Mixon, and I think they did that for a reason. I think they would like to be a little bit more balanced than they were last year. So does that mean some of those snaps and touches end up going to Mixon versus CJ Stroud throwing the football? I think that's something we sort of have to keep in mind there. My answer to all of this has been just to draft CJ Stroud and kind of wash my hands of the rest.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. I don't like. I think Dell should be ahead of Diggs, and if I'm going to take one of these guys, I will take the one that is the least expensive, which right now is Dell for some of those reasons you just mentioned. But realistically, I think the most correct answer is to take Stroud because it's so hard to figure out who's going to get the targets here, who's going to get the touchdowns. All these guys are talented, even if Diggs has taken a step back. But what we do know is that they should all be pretty solid, and that Stroud looked incredible last year with just two of them. Should be even better. This is why we're seeing CJ Stroud go where he is. So I like that take.
And he can now absorb a loss at receiver and still have two of these three guys available. I think the one other thing besides draft Stroud is that Dalton Schultz is probably cooked in terms of his target. He's probably the odd man out.
Yeah, definitely not as likely to get as many targets as we would have liked prior to the addition of Diggs. All right, let's hop over to another situation with a lot of good receivers, but we're only hitting on one of the ADPs here, and that's DJ Moore. Reason being, he's going at the 402. That's wide receiver 20 between Cooper Kupp and DK Metcalf / Devontae Smith. This is a season after he was the wide receiver 6 with Justin Fields at quarterback. Obviously, I think most people would consider, even as a rookie, Caleb Williams to be an upgrade as a passer over Justin Fields, but on the flip side, they of course added Keenan Allen and Rome Odunze in the draft. So this wide receiver 20 ranking feels like a huge reaction to the addition of other targets, which fair enough. Is it an overreaction for you, John? Should he be going higher than this, or is this the right spot?
Well, I have him at wide receiver 17, and I was surprised to learn that I'm high on him with this wide receiver 20 ADP. But apparently, managers have really accounted for, number one, a quarterback change, even though could be an upgrade. He doesn't. All these receivers are starting fresh with Caleb Williams. I mean, I think Keenan Allen is in the same apartment complex or something. So the locker room effect might play.
Are they eating breakfast together?
Yeah, breakfast burritos, breakfast with Matthew. So that's, I have Moore as a solid wide receiver too. I'm looking at the projections, and he is, only 5 points ahead of the wide receiver 24, which is George Pickens in half PPR. So again, this is a bunched up sort of tier. If I were to adjust anything, he could drop pretty significantly. You don't have his ADP here, but Keenan Allen to me strikes me as the value. If he can, when healthy, he was the number 2 fantasy receiver on a per game basis. He posts career highs in receiving yards. So I think he's still got it. He'll be a best friend for a rookie quarterback as well. The guy I'm sort of worried about is Odunze, but he's going where his ADP is about where I have him ranked. So I guess I could end up with a few shares of him as well.
Marcus, I don't think there are many people better suited to answer what to expect from Caleb Williams. Can he support all three of these guys for fantasy to some degree, to usable degree, and B, DJ Moore at wide receiver 20 or better as a rookie?
Well, I'll start with the DJ Moore thing because I do think he's going too low, but I'm grateful for the discount because I think he's the one guy who we know. I think we kind of have his role sort of locked in. I do have questions about Shane Waldron and how he's going to deploy three wide receivers. I mean, anybody who drafted Jackson Smith and Jigba last year can sort of see how that played out and how frustrating that was when JSN was basically just kind of the really underneath guy, and it kind of led to a disappointing season. I would say that, having watched Caleb, if it is the Caleb Williams that we saw the last couple years at USC, I think that bodes really well for a guy like Rome Odunze, who I think when things break down and the scramble drill starts, will be more likely to sort of take off downfield. If it's that same Caleb Williams who wants to play hero ball and try to hit the home run when things break down, I think that works out for Moore, and I think that works out for Odunze. If the Bears coaching staff can sort of rein him in and get him to make the safe play more often than not, then I think that bears well for Keenan Allen. Ideally, though, I just want a situation where Shane Waldron's not afraid to put all three of those guys on the field consistently and let them get their opportunities. But I do think that Caleb Williams is good enough to support. I'll say this. I'm not one of those people who thinks that he comes in the first year and immediately hits the 4,000-yard mark. I know that's the big expectation that's placed on him because the Bears have never had a 4,000-yard passer. I think he reaches that mark. I don't think he necessarily reaches it in year one. I think he gets you 3,800 yards, which is a pretty good rookie season. And I think that along the way, if the touchdown numbers are there, I think that's enough to support all three of those guys.
Yeah, this kind of feels like a light version of the Texan situation where all those three of those guys can support Caleb Williams maybe better than he can support all three of those guys. Whether that's enough to get him to 4,000 yards, TBD, we'll see. But I like DJ Moore at this value as well. All right, let's hop down to a running back. We've got a couple running backs left and then one more receiver. Alvin Kamara, currently going at the 501, running back 17. That's after Kenneth Walker and way ahead of David Montgomery and Aaron Jones. Notably, he's the 605 on Underdog, so that's, again, a round later. One of those guys who's going in a different spot on Underdog than he is in the overall aggregate. Marcus, I'll throw it to you. This is a guy who's struggled the past few seasons, has not scored touchdowns like he did early on in his career. We don't know what entirely to expect from the Saints offense. There seems to be a lot of question marks around Kamara this year. Is RB17, 501 the right answer to those questions?
I think it is. I mean, look, he was the RB11 last year, didn't play the full season. And I just look at this offense. Chris Olave is going to get his targets. I know a lot of people like Rashid Shaheed. He feels sort of like the quintessential better and best ball guy because there will be some boom weeks. There will be some not so great weeks. Beyond that, I think the guy who consistently is going to get targets in this offense is going to be Alvin Kamara. Now, I throw a little bit of an asterisk on it because last year he had 75 catches for 466 yards. Like, that's not great. But in a PPR world or even a half PPR world, that still gets you quite a bit. So if he can stay healthy, if he can play, a full season and still be the number 2 target on this team, I think that goes a long way towards sort of keeping him in that top 20 running back chain argument that we're talking about here. And I think when you're talking about him at that ADP, coming off the board as RB17, that really is sort of all you're asking for. Look, I've heard a lot of scuttlebutt. There are people who are excited about, or maybe not excited, intrigued maybe is a better word, about the Saints offense this year, because I don't know that you'll ever get excited about a Derek Carr-led offense. But there's some reason to be sort of intrigued, but I still just think, look, it's Chris Olave and it's Alvin Kamara, and they're going to be your top 2 targets at the end of the year.
John, I run in the dynasty streets quite a lot, and I think that I am more exposed to the Kendre Miller love there than maybe redraft is, but I think it's starting to seep into redraft a little bit, the Kendre Miller hype. I mean, Alvin Kamara is turning 29 tomorrow as we record this. Do you have any concerns that Kendre Miller takes enough work that this ends up being too high a price for Alvin Kamara?
Well, happy birthday, Alvin Kamara. No, I think they just ride him as long as he's healthy. He had the number 6 per game average. Marcus alluded to the 11th place finish, but missing a few games. his average was top 6, and he's going RB17. I have him at RB16. I think that's a fair price for a running back who is starting to approach that dreaded age 30. But I think he still has another season of high catch volume and should get a few touchdowns, but be a big part of this passing attack.
Yeah, I think the real key here is just, do you have points for reception in some format in your league? Like Marcus said, if it's even half PPR, Kamara can return value on this number. If it's full, he might even be better than this. If not, I don't feel super confident about what he'll do in that offense, but he's going to catch balls, and that's enough in these scoring formats. All right, we'll hit one more running back. Zamir White, a out-of-the-blue star at the end of last year, was the RB8 over the last 4 weeks of the season when he became the starter under Antonio Pierce, who is now locked in as a head coach for the Raiders. He's going at RB21, the 609, ahead of Ramondre Stevenson, DeAndre Swift, Najee Harris, aforementioned Raheem Mostert, some guys we've seen a little more run from than Zamir White in his 4 games, but they seem committed to the run. They seem excited about him. John, are you excited about drafting Zamir White?
I just, my core principles tell me, yes, this is a guy who has kind of been on the background for a while, finally got his chance. I'm from the school of Michael Turner going from the Chargers to Atlanta way back when. And I remember getting Michael Turner in the 4th or 5th round, and I was excited. And he finished like RB2 overall that year. And the backup that's quality that gets his chance to be the lead back. And then you have the Lamont Jordans and the Chester Taylors, and I'm totally dating myself, but these are the guys that I try to hang my hat on when you are talking about this. You get, and what's scaring me is that they did sign. Yes, they did. I just want to confirm that Alexander Mattison is the RB2 there. And I feel like that's a big warning light, because I was in on Alexander Mattison last year, who had flashed production and efficiency in brief stints in his previous games when Dalvin Cook was injured, and RB1 type numbers, and he kind of fell flat on his face last year. So I'm trying to hedge my bets a little bit, not get too into Zamir White, but in the last 4 games, 83, 145, 106, 121 total yards in consecutive games. He had 1 touchdown, caught 9 passes, fantasy RB8 in that span. It's hard not to like. Among the 41 running backs with 25 plus total carries in the last 4 weeks, White was 9th in yards after contact per attempt, so top quarter in that. He has the number 20 rushing grade out of 55 backs in that span per PFF, and he did well as a pass blocker. We know that Alexander Madison's probably not going to take his job. So I think he's going to be like a high floor in terms of touches, but he might just average 4.1 yards per carry or something like that in an offense that isn't that great. So I do think he's like an RB2, but I don't think that the ceiling is necessarily there, even if the touch floor is.
Marcus, do you find yourself in the Michael Turner school or the Alexander Mattison school when it comes to these backups who show out and then get a starting gig?
Well, for Zamir White, at least, I think I tend to be more in the Alexander Mattison school, which is I guess fitting, right? Because that's who his backup is. I mean, I did laugh, right? Josh Jacobs leaves and goes to Green Bay, and everybody on fantasy Twitter is like, it's Zamir White season. And then they sign Alexander Mattison, and fantasy Twitter's like, it's Zamir White season. I'm sort of with John, though. Like, I think we can't completely overlook it. Like, I don't know that Madison's going to push him and take over the starting job, but I feel like he could do just enough to sort of be annoying in an offense that is not going to score a lot of touchdowns this year, that could potentially be playing from behind if we don't see any improvement on the defensive side of the ball. Understanding, they got 2 games a year against the Chiefs. They got 2 games a year against the Chargers, who might not be super high powered, but can still kind of play ball control and keep you, on the sideline for a little bit. So I wonder if that artificially puts a cap on what White's touches are going to be. You still have to figure out how to keep Devontae Adams happy. You got to figure out how to get the ball to Jacoby Myers. You got 2 quarterbacks in Aiden O'Connell and Gardner Minshew that are, I think sort of stopgap pieces, but definitely not the future of the franchise in any way, shape, or form. So as much as Antonio Pierce wants to play defense and run the football, it's the Mike Tyson quote. Everybody has a plan until they get punched in the mouth. Like when this offense gets punched in the mouth, can they stick to that commitment to the run, or is circumstance going to force them to have to be a little bit more pass happy? And I think that more than anything has kept me away from Zamir White.
Very briefly before we move on to our last player, I had it pointed out to me, shout out Hoosier in the YouTube chat, that Kendre Miller left practice early today with a hamstring injury. And Dennis Allen said, quote, "That's a player that's going to have to figure out how to stay healthy because it's hard to make the team from the training room."
Oh,
so that's not good.
Alvin Kamara to the moon.
Yeah. Update Alvin Kamara ADP RB11. Good gracious. All right. Well, we'll see what happens there. Last guy, and then we'll get to our rapid fire ADP game. Jordan Addison. Currently going at the 805. That is wide receiver 40. He was the wide receiver 21 last year. Right now he's going behind Deontay Johnson and DeAndre Hopkins, ahead of guys like Rome Odunze and Ladd McConkey, rookies, obviously. As a rookie, Jordan Addison was incredible, but he lost Kirk Cousins. We talked earlier about the guys who got Kirk Cousins. Jordan Addison lost him and will likely be dealing with some combination throughout the year of Sam Darnold and a rookie in J.J. McCarthy. Marcus, I'll throw it to you once again. Have to do it. Do you believe in Addison at this ADP? Should he be higher than this, or is this right with the quarterback situation?
Oh, he should not be higher than this for sure. Yeah, and it's strictly the quarterback situation. It's got me scared about the Vikings in general. Maybe I'm overweight on Ladd McConkey. I think I'd take Ladd McConkey over Jordan Addison. Behind Deontay is fine. I think behind Nuke is fine. I think him and Odunze maybe a coin flip in general, but I definitely can't take him any higher than this. I would rather take him lower than this. I will say this: I would prefer Sam Darnold over J.J. McCarthy, just because. And this isn't some great Sam Darnold defense, but it's more that what will probably happen is that Darnold will make some silly throws in the first half, throw some picks, put his team behind, and then he'll come out firing in the second half. So maybe the game scripts will kind of favor Jordan Addison, but that's also kind of a scary way to live on a roster that's going to have a healthy Justin Jefferson. So I've kind of washed my hands of Addison this offseason.
John, are you in the same boat here?
I am. See, and this is another issue with doing, I don't know, issue is the right word, but symptom of doing full projections is because right now I'm also trying to account for this DUI he was arrested for, and whether or not this is going to lead to a suspension. He already had it was a misdemeanor. It went down to misdemeanor, the 140 mile per hour speeding incident that he had. So I don't know, I've got him, projected right now for 761 receiving yards, but I think that's sort of baking in a short suspension. So I have him wide receiver 55. I think I would draft him earlier than that, knowing that if I have him for the last 12 or 14 games of the season, he's going to outproduce the guys that are going, slightly ahead of him. But as you guys mentioned, the quarterback situation is dicey. Big downgrade from Kirk Cousins. Touchdowns are going to drop from last year. Yardage is going to drop from last year. So the one thing that I think he has working in his favor is that TJ Hawkinson is not probably going to be ready the first half of the season, or as productive. If he is out there, he's not getting the targets that he was getting last year. And that might require the quarterback lean on Addison a little bit more.
Yeah. Addison was another guy who made my touchdowns expectation article. He scored 10 last year. He should have scored 6.3. So that was already likely to come down. Now you add the quarterback drop off, and I'm not touching him with a 10-foot pole. Even at this ADP, I'm not getting him anywhere. So I'm pretty out. All right. We have 6 minutes left, technically. Let's do a rapid fire ADP game. So I'm going to give you a couple names, sometimes a few more than a couple. They're rough ADP right now, and you tell me who you want and a sentence on why. You guys ready?
Yep.
All right, Marcus, we'll go to you first on each one, and then we'll hit John. Brandon Ayuk or Deebo Samuel, same team for now, back-to-back at the 304, 305. Ayuk is reporting to camp, by the way.
He's reporting to camp, and he apparently went back into the meeting room with John Lynch, so maybe they're trying to work things out. I'm just throwing that out there. I'm taking Ayuk. I think he's the wide receiver one. I think Debo does a lot of great things for the 49ers, but that doesn't always translate to fantasy.
John?
I'm going to go the same way, and I think that if there is trade risk with him, he probably will land in a better situation in terms of his targets. He's a low target, high efficiency guy, and I think he's a lot better than people give him credit for in terms of his route running.
Yeah, I agree on all points, particularly the trade thing. The one reason to take Debo over Ayuk might be the trade concern, but if you think Ayuk's going to go somewhere where he gets more targets, which I agree he probably would, that may even just be a step up. All right. Tight end face-off. Mark Andrews and Trey McBride. Marcus talked about it earlier. I'm going to take one of those guys. Well, now you have to pick one. Back-to-back at the 409, 410. Marcus, you get off.
I guess I'm going to take McBride if he's got the better ADP. I know it's only one spot, but, one spot. You can brag about that. So it's a win-win for me, but I'll go McBride.
John?
I'm going with Andrews. I do have a slight concern. I like McBride. I have a slight concern with the addition of Marvin Harrison to that offense, that his high target floor that we saw late last year is not going to sustain.
Well, I took Trey McBride in the Scott Fishbowl when I believe I had a chance to take Mark Andrews. So I'm going to go with Trey McBride here as well. Although it's worth noting that's a tight end premium, which helps, I think, McBride a little bit more because he's going to be heavily relying on those catches, whereas Andrew's likely to get a few more touchdowns. All right. This is a mega ADP game comparison. So I'm going to give you a bunch of names. You have to pick one. Zay Flowers, Malik Neighbors, Tank Dell, T. Higgins, or George Pickens. They are all going somewhere in the 5th round at that kind of borderline wide receiver 2 tier. Marcus, of that group, which one do you like?
I like Pickens. Aside from the highlight reel catches, very little target competition, and I'm not convinced that Russell Wilson is complete dust. Maybe partially dust, not complete dust, and that's enough.
John?
I would go with Pickens as well. I have it Pickens, Dell, and Neighbors at 24, 25, 26. I think it is a sizable quarterback upgrade for Pickens, even if it's not the most exciting quarterback upgrade for Pickens. But Deontay Johnson also out of the way. It could be a breakout year for George Pickens.
Well, I was hoping this was going to be more exciting and controversial, but I am also going with George Pickens. I wrote an article on him for 4 for 4 this year, and I will just throw this in for Marcus's Russell Wilson point. Since he came into the league over his career, no quarterback has provided more fantasy points per target to their pass catchers than Russell Wilson. And if you think he's falling off, last year only one quarterback provided more fantasy points per target to their pass catchers than Russell Wilson, and that was Brock Purdy. So I think George Pickens is in a great situation to boom here. All right, we'll do another trio of wide receivers here. This is at the end of the 6th round, start of the 7th, so at the 6-7 turn. Calvin Ridley, Jaden Reed, Chris Godwin. I think we might get a couple different answers here. Let's see. Marcus, who are you going with?
I'm going to go Chris Godwin. I love the reports about him working primarily from the slot again this year, and for all the great things Mike Evans did, it was Chris Godwin that led the Bucs in catches last year.
John?
I have Godwin slightly ahead of Ridley at 33 and 34. Jaden Reed, just side note, I'm not confident that he's going to be able to repeat, especially if Christian Watson stays healthy. That whole receiving core is wild to project. But I agree with Marcus that the moving to the slot helps. Godwin, he did have some really good fantasy finishes when he was playing mostly in the slot. But that was with Tom Brady, though. That's a different quarterback and a different passing attack than with Baker Mayfield. So I'm not getting too excited about Godwin, but I do think this is an uptick from what he saw last year. And he should also, I think, regress positively. Did he show up in your touchdown article as a positive regression candidate?
Yep. I was just going to mention that he was well under his expected touchdowns last year, and I believe we know him to be the kind of guy who will bounce up from that. So I like Chris Godwin quite a bit. However, I'm not going to go full 3 for 3 here. I'm going to take Calvin Ridley. While I like Godwin a lot, I think his floor is great. I don't think he has the ceiling that Ridley does, where he becomes a true one and has, 80 to 90 catches and 8 to 10 touchdowns. I think Ridley is more likely to hit that kind of ceiling. And I think Jaden Reed, probably all of us agree to some degree, has the least chance of that given the mess of targets. A mess might not be the right word because it's so nice. The wealth of targets in the Green Bay receiver room. All right, let's do a running back trio. Tony Pollard, Jalen Warren, Zach Moss. These guys are the 802, 803, 804 back-to-back-to-back. Pollard, Warren, Moss, Marcus. Who are you taking?
Probably taking Jalen Warren. He's been my preferred Pittsburgh back so far this offseason. I think Tyjae Spears is going to eat into Tony Pollard's production. And I really am believing that Chase Brown is going to be more detrimental to Zach Moss than I think a lot of people believe. So Jalen Warren's the guy for me.
Okay, John.
I think Warren is the most talented right now of these three. I've got him below Moss, though, due to the Moss's touch floor, which I think is pretty substantial there as he's replacing Joe Mixon. Chase Brown is a bit of a concern, but it seems like he's more of the backup right now. And they brought Moss in for a reason.
Yeah, I think it's I don't think it's a stretch to say Moss is the least talented of this trio, but he has the best offense, no question, and I think he has the least competition. Though, to your point, Marcus, Chase Brown is a great electric back. Najee Harris and Tyjae Spears both, I think, project for a little more work. So I'm going to take the guy in the best offense with the best opportunity, talent be damned, and go Zach Moss here. All right. This one's going to be a little different. Rather than just head-to-head, it's going to be at cost. So Hollywood Brown going at the 704, Rashee Rice going at the 708, Xavier Worthy going at the 812. I'm sure you see the theme here. And these ADPs are pretty fluctuating right now, given obviously Xavier Worthy being a rookie, getting a lot of highlights out of camp. Rashee Rice's situation, we don't know what's going to happen there. But Marcus, Hollywood 704, Rashee 708, Xavier Worthy at 812. Who do you want at cost?
I want Hollywood. I think he's the most experienced guy. I think he's explosive, and the Chiefs have said they want to be a more vertical offense. And I think I look at Rashee Rice last year. So many of his touches were manufactured. I don't think that happens again this year. I think Xavier Worthy is a guy who has some big games, but I also think those come a little bit later in the season.
John,
where do you guys think Rice would be going if he didn't have this hit and run case?
Probably a couple rounds, 5?
2-3 rounds earlier?
Yeah.
5 or late 4, I would say.
They added this talent at receiver via free agency, or was it a trade? Hollywood Brown, and then Xavier Worthy in the draft. So that they're putting Rice's targets under some pressure. I have Brown slightly ahead of Rice, and I have Worthy down further down in the projections. So I like right now with that suspension sort of looming, I think this is an opportunity for Marquise Brown and on a 1-year deal, I believe, to really have make a lot of money with Patrick Mahomes as his quarterback. Yeah. Really a great spot for him to land in with Rice dealing with this off-field stuff, and not a lot of target competition outside of Travis Kelce.
This is a really tough one for me. I think I'm going to take Worthy just because at the 812, he's the least expensive right now. The selection of Worthy in the draft gives me concerns about what we're going to get from Rice this year, both from a games played perspective and also even from just, is he going to lose a lot of that work that he dominated last year with both the addition of Hollywood and Worthy. Fastest guy in the league with Patrick Mahomes throwing the ball. Seems like a pretty good combination. We'll see how good it is, and obviously as a rookie, but I like Worthy at this particular cost. All right, couple more. Let's go quarterback trio. Tua Tagovailoa, Jared Goff, Caleb Williams, and Justin Herbert. These are the kind of iffy quarterbacks that once you get past the elite several, you get to this tier, going in rounds 9 to 10. Marcus, of this group, Tua, Goff, Caleb, and Herbert. Which one do you like?
I think I like Goff slightly more. It's a toss-up between Tua and Goff for me, and I think the difference is both of them have tough schedules down the stretch. The Dolphins' schedule down the stretch is absolutely brutal. The last 6 or so weeks of the season. So just because the Lions have a slightly, and I say slightly, easier go of it, give me Goff.
John?
I have Tua at 13. I have Goff at 14. Caleb Williams at 15. Justin Herbert at 17. So you did pick a good crew here to pick from. The thing I would like to point out is that Jared Goff, his home away splits are so stark. I mean,
they're messy.
There is a opportunity with him. What's his ADP? Like QB 12 to 14, somewhere in there.
I'll pull it up.
Okay, so he's going in a place where an owner or a manager could draft him
14.
and then also plan to either draft a second quarterback to start in Goff's away games or stream that position. And you could get a lot of points because he's like a top 5, top 4 type quarterback at home. And then he just turns into, QB 24 on the road, basically. So, only start him in your really good matchups on the road, but just he crushes it at home. So I just want to point that out. I kind of have Tua one spot ahead of him. Tua's receiving core is one of the best in the league. He's got Achane now as well. Odell Beckham, Jonnu Smith now at tight end. I mean, so many weapons there in that offense, but I haven't studied the late season schedule that Marcus referred to.
By the way, as my pal Adam Rank famously once said, Jared Goff is an indoor cat. So
yeah, correct. This is really tough for me. I'm gonna go with Tua primarily for what you said at the end there, John, which is the weaponry. I would like to take Justin Herbert here because I think we are overreacting to the high T offense situation in LA. And I think Justin Herbert is still going to throw the ball and he's going to throw it efficiently. He's going to throw a lot of touchdowns, but he just does not have the weaponry realistically that any of these guys have, but especially that Tua has. And the Goff situation, I will say to your point, John, if I could guarantee myself a nice stream buddy who played against a good matchup every time Goff was on the road, I'd take Goff because I really like Goff, but I'm going to take Tua. I've been a Tua truther for a while. I think he's got the most upside of this crew. So, all right,
It sounds like a good article idea for Goff. Who do you pair with Goff as QBBC?
Make a note. All right,
indoor cat.
Last group. You know what? I had Kendra Miller in this group. We're going to throw him right out because it sounds like the coaching staff is just tired of him. So this is just a fun sleeper running back pick to end the both podcast and theoretically your draft, depending on how deep it is. Rico Dowdle and Antonio Gibson. Not the exciting names we've been talking about necessarily, but have some upside. They're going at 1304 and 1305. Marcus, if you're picking one of these guys, maybe you went 0 RB. Which one is it?
It's a Godfather 3 situation with Antonio Gibson. Like I thought I was out, and I've been pulled back in. I get it. Look, Ramondre's going to get a lot of touches. He's going to get most of them, but I just still have this feeling that maybe the Patriots use Gibson as the pass catcher we hoped he would have been in Washington. I don't know if you heard this, but Antonio Gibson was a wide receiver in college. So I think maybe the Patriots give him those targets that we always hoped he would get. So that has me back in on him.
John?
I would go with Dowdle due to his RB2. They're both RB2s. His is in a much better offense. He's playing behind a much older running back who's I don't think at this point is as talented as Ramondre Stevenson. So for those reasons, and Dowdle, has shown something here and there. So I think he's, to me, is better than a better pick than Gibson.
Yeah, I'm going to agree with you on that one, primarily because of the offense, like you mentioned, the guy ahead of him, and the amount of money that the team spent on the guy ahead of him. Patriots just paid Ramondre. And yes, the Cowboys technically just paid Ezekiel Elliott, but it was pennies, as it should be. So I'll go Dowdle there. All right, Marcus, awesome to have you on. Thanks a ton. I will be seeing you shortly, I imagine. Yeah. But before we say goodbye, just let everybody know where they can find you, where they can watch you on the television tubes in the near future.
Yeah, most of the stuff you can see, I post on Twitter, X, whatever we're calling it, at Marcus G, MarcasG. But as I mentioned at the top of the show, NFL Fantasy Live back on NFL Network starting on August 12th. Check your local listings for show times. The NFL Fantasy Football Podcast a couple times a week. And then for those of you in LA who want to hear me do some radio every once in a while, check out ESPN 17. Oh, I guess I got to remember Fantasy Live too, doing a radio show, a serious show on Saturdays with Chris Manzo. And I believe there's some streaming shows coming soon. Stay with me on Twitter for that.
All the places. John, any closing thoughts?
Yeah, I've decided that I'm going to continue to call it Twitter until when you type in Twitter.com and it doesn't take you to
That's
X,
very fair.
Then we're going to keep it on Twitter. At 44_John to find me on Twitter. I'm working on my 44 stats article right now, which will be up. I'm assuming within the week. I just want to thank Marcus for coming on. It's my first time meeting him via podcast land, so I appreciate you coming on.
Yeah, it's good to be here. Appreciate you guys having me.
I will be sticking with Twitter until they come up with a fun name for the posts and don't just call them posts, because that's lame and I like to call them tweets. But until that happens, or until next time, we'll see you later. Adios.